So how do we make journalism relevant again? It's not necessarily a new or original or even a creative question, but the more I try to answer it, and the more I think that it's actually the wrong sort of question to be asking, because there's another layer to it underneath, and that layer is facts. And that question is really, how do we make facts relevant again? I would argue that right now the world is experiencing a unique cultural relationship to objective facts that we have not really seen before. A few days after the US election, Oxford Dictionaries announced that its word of the year for 2016 was post-truth. And they describe that as an adjective defined as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotional and personal belief. And we've been talking during this conference about how this post-truth climate has played out. Examples like Brexit and the US election that seem to show that objective facts based on empirical data seem to matter less and less in people's day-to-day lives and decision-making. That's such a blow to journalists like us who work in the facts business. And this actually came up in a big way in Canada during this wildfire that you're seeing on the screen here. It was in the spring. This fire caught the tens of thousands of people who live in Fort McMurray, Alberta, by surprise. There were flames that were already destroying homes before officials realized what was going on and called an evacuation. The public broadcaster CBC was the only news outlet that was on the air at that time, and we heard from lots of people who listened to CBC from their cars as they tried to escape, who said they believed that reliable, factual information they received during that time actually saved their lives. And we're a slide behind here, so bear with me. But that was a reminder that facts through reliable news agencies can have undeniable relevance and value. But that reminder was fleeting, because just last weekend in the same province of Alberta, a conservative media website organized a protest against the Alberta Premier, Rachel Notley, and they chanted, "Lock her up." Now this happened as candidates for the leadership of Canada's Conservative Party seem to be trying to appeal to the same nationalist, anti-immigrant, often racist forces that openly bragged about spreading misinformation to help Trump win the US election. Now the gap that has opened in Canada to allow that misinformation in starts with a failed traditional news business model. For example, there is a huge concentration of media ownership right now in Canada. Post Media recently bought its main competitor and the majority of newspapers across the country, and that company is failing. Last summer, Post Media was $648 million in debt, and at the same time, the public broadcaster, CBC, is shrinking. They had a plan to cut their workforce by 25% by the year 2020. So now most Canadian news outlets operate under this more for less philosophy, which many of you probably also ascribe to. Local newspapers are losing depth as they lose reporters, and the Canadian public broadcaster, at least in the regions, is now focused more on filling quotas of output. And then we end up with this sort of cannibalism cycle. You know, revenue and funding are disappearing. We see layoffs to try and correct that. The product suffers. And then we have shrinking engagement, and we have less trust with the audience that's consuming these products. No wonder audience engagement has fallen. In Canada, for example, our National Statistics Agency found the number of people aged 15 to 34 who stated they rarely or never follow news nearly doubled between 2003 and 2013. So maybe it's time, as you saw back there, to wipe the chalkboard clean, that blank slate, and to do what we're doing here, which is trying to rethink how we curate and deliver the facts through news. How do we reach this generation and the next who appear to crave information but seem to be losing trust in quote-unquote traditional news? Should we increase transparency by using standardized market markers like those suggested by the Trust Project? Do we start a virtual fact record? Maybe try to become more democratic in our pitching, reporting, and publishing processes by inviting the public in, as some have suggested here? Can we find sustainable funding models for local news, collaborate more often with each other, and create more personalized products for our audiences through newsletters and chat groups that drive participation up? And what about exploring alternative news delivery models, like the data journalism weather portal that Richard has been talking about? You know, maybe the answer to helping the public find a healthier relationship with facts requires a sea change that incorporates some or most of those ideas that we've been talking about here. Of course, we don't know that yet, and that's what we're here to talk about. But what I do know is this, and you saw that quote go by, that in a time of drastic change, it is the learners who inherit the future. And the learned usually find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. So I think every one of us is here tonight and for this conference because we are learners who recognize that 2016 basically marked the end of a world of journalism that we once knew. So I'm going to ask that you join me now in raising a glass you hopefully refreshed at the beginning of the talk, in a toast that is both in memoriam to the end of that world's existence, but also in celebration of this unique opportunity to reimagine what the new journalism world could look like and facts world could look like, and to rebuild it. So cheers. Cheers. To all of you.